Greetings, students. I'm Dr. Sadri, your professor for this course. And what I'm going to do today for our CPO 3403, Politics of the Middle East, is I'm going to cover Module 7. As you can see, the title of Module 7 is Political Institutions. So if you remember, in the previous one, we were focused on the leadership. We talked about some of the leaders of the Middle East. Now, this is another major instrument from perspective of political scientists, of course, is that right? That would bring some change to the society. What are the political institutions? So in that regard, we have a very simple and basic one outline. I'm going to start with an introduction, then we go and talk about the notion of modernization, then we talked about military as one of those political institutions. If you remember, we talked about this one a little bit before when we were talking about the three leaders of the Middle East, is that right? They all have some kind of military background. Then we talk about bureaucracy as another institution, political institution that can bring a change. Then we talk about legislature as, again, another political institution. And last but not least, we conclude. Okay, so having said that, let's start with introduction. Now, one of the most important things we need to consider is the notion that in every society, there are different types of institutions. There are institutions that they make policy. There are institutions that implement policy. For example, in our system, in American system, U.S. Congress makes laws. In other words, makes policy. And DOD, Department of Defense, implements the policies that they want, the government wants. Presidents make policy. Who implements it? Department of Justice, Department of State, you see? So we have policy making and policy what? Implementing institution. Two different what function. Okay, that's one thing. Why there is no very strong participatory organization in the what? In the Middle East. Is that right? Because that's our main attention. So in that regard, we can say one aspect of it, people have blamed it on the external factor. One external factor has been the notion of colonialism. Is that right? Even in places like Iran that was never actually a formal colony like India, is that right? The foreign powers, the colonial powers, they had tremendous amount of influence. There was a time in 1907 that the Russian and the British divided Iran into what? Here we go. To two different stages. If I can bring this one here. Okay. Okay. Right, it's not cooperating right now. Okie doke. All right. Okay. Here. They divided Iran into what? Into two major spheres of influence. The British were in the south. Okay. The British were in the south. Remember that the British were very much interested in the oil, richness of the Persian Gulf and the southern part of Iran. And the Russians were interested in the northern part. So they had like a line right there to the country, in the middle of the country, and then there was a very small neutral area, is that right? So the British and the Russian forces, they do not accidentally get into a fight or something. And then the southern part was under the British influence, the northern part was under Russian one, okay? So this has sometimes happened over there, and of course it's not something, that we can deny, is that right? And sometimes there were the colonial powers that actually had complete control of the country. India, Egypt for quite a while, and etc. So in that regard, we can say they sabotaged the democratic moves of places like Egypt, like Jordan, like Iraq, like Syria. Is that right? And then also sometimes there was no interest in the popular awareness. Why should they make the population of their territory aware? People who are aware, they don't want to be ruled by foreigners. They want to be ruled by themselves. Is that right? That's a natural thing. Another factor that they bring is about the region. They say the neighboring states. Sometimes the neighboring states would cause you trouble because you have a struggle with them in terms of your border. Your border is not clear. Or if it's clear, they say, wait a minute, they gave this city to you. That city has historically been part of my place, And if you wanted to get technical about it, sometimes it can get very, very complicated. Is that right? Like, for example, look at Iran and Iraq. Is that right? Iran is a part of the leftover of the Persian Empire. But there was a time in the history of Persian Empire that Iraq was a part of the Persian Empire. In fact, the capital of Persian Empire was in Iraq. All right? So here we go. Nowadays, Iraq is not known to be a Persian state. Is that right? It's known to be an Arab state because the Arab tribes, historically, they moved eventually all the way up there. Is that right? Some they existed, but not as many as they were. And then you would see the historical connection to even in terms of some of the names, okay? So the capital of the Persian Empire was there, as I mentioned before, okay? Until the Islamic, empire grew and then defeated the Persians, and then they started, doing their own things and establishing their own, rule. The city actually of Baghdad, is that right? You know what that means? In Persian, in Old Persian, Bak means God, Dad means gave. God gave. Why? That city is located between the two rivers, is that right? Mesopotamia region, historically. It's like a God's gift. Because without that, look at the rest of Iraq, it's desert. Is that right? So what I'm trying to tell you is, then, when Iraq, even, changed hands back and forth between Iran and, Persia and the Ottoman Empire, is that right? When Iran and Iraq, border became kind of messy for a while when it became kind of independent country. So some Iraqis, they had some claims over Iranian territories. Some Iranians, they had claim over the Iraqi territory. That's what we call sometimes your neighboring states can become what? Not necessarily so friendly toward you. They can become sometimes your number one enemy. And also sometimes in some states, some local powers, they say, there is a group that is within my country, but it's acting like what they call the fifth column, like a group, a foreign group inside my country running against me and running against our country. During the Ottoman Empire, that was such a vast empire, multinational empires, one group of people who were under the Ottomans were the Armenians, because Armenians, as you can imagine, see? Okay, right now we can see actually a republic called Armenia, is that right? But the territory was a little larger than that. And you see what we say, Turkey and everything, that was a part of the Ottomans. Well, they were a part of it. And then what happened was, every time historically there was a problem between the local Armenians and the Ottoman empires, the Armenians would go to Tsarist Russia, which was also Orthodox, is that right? Oh, help me with this and that. So little by little, the Turks, they started looking at Armenians. These guys are like fifth column, you see? And it's attitude like that in 1915 basically end up in what many Armenians have called what? The Armenian genocide. Because they started moving the Armenian by force from one section to another section, etc., etc. Pretty much like in the history of our country, what, after, President Jackson and during that time period, is that right? They started moving the Native Americans all the way from eastern part of our country, down to what we call the Trail of Tears, is that right? To the western part of the country. They keep pushing them more and more and more toward the west, is that right? So same type of things that done over there. All right. Having said that one, now let's move on to the next slide. Continuation of the, talking about introduction. So why not strong, participatory organization? Now let's talk about the internal factor. We talked about external, internal factor. Some of the internal factors were militarism, strategic location. Any of these countries, they can say, oh, I'm a strategic location. Iran, a strategic location. Turkey, strategic location. Egypt, strategic location. Egypt is connecting what? Egypt is connecting basically Africa to what? To Asia. Is that right? Turkey is a bridge between Europe and Asia. Then Iran, a bridge between what? North and South. So every single one of them, they can make that type of what? A case. Defensive modernization. Defensive modernization notion goes to the whole idea that, all right, what we need to do is to defend our country, we have to come up with products and services that defend ours against the what? Foreign, elements. As you notice, the reading talks about this quite a bit. So many of these countries, they started establishing, modernizing their military first, training them, uniform, trying to make as many of at least the basic weapon system that they can make themselves. And then they were desperate, of course, for the most technological one that they had to buy from what? From outside the country. Okay. Then the next thing is high military expenditures. Is that right? Well, in that regard, military costs money. It's not for free. So Where does the money come from? Taxes. Some of these countries, they were able to tax their people. Some of the countries, they were fortunate to have oil, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like many of the kingdoms and everything. And the advantage of that was what? The advantage of that was they didn't have to tax their people so much. Okay? So, absence of the socioeconomic prerequisite. Some of these countries, they didn't have the right, for example, institution, professional institution, groups, this, that, to what? That we take for granted. Like we take for granted that in our country we have so many interest groups, so many different political parties. You see, some of those things are very much necessary before what? You can establish a more participatory system. Absence of a viable middle class. Many of these countries, very, very simple division between rich, poor. When we say rich and poor, it's not like equal number of people. No, rich, top 1%, poor, 99%. You see? So this is like a recipe for disaster, guys. Okay? If you're going to be ever a leader of a country, make sure that you have a middle class. Because a middle class is the backbone of the society. It's the middle class that gives a society a sense of stability. So some of the lower level of the upper class comes to that one, and many of the lower classes, hopefully they are empowered, educated, they get jobs and they can do this and that, and they become the middle class. And that becomes the what? Strength of your country. And then last but not least factor that they're talking about is political culture. So Islam that we talked about in like module 2, if you remember, we talked about it as a political scientist as what? As an ideology. But that has played a very interesting role, because some people, they say Islam or any religion would prevent you from development, because they look at Europe, is that right? Because during the Dark Ages, Europe was under religious leaders and there was not much of a growth. And then as soon as they started getting educated and the reformist movement came out and questioning the Pope and questioning religion, and then the life of, rationalization and scientific this, then Europe started changing. So some people, they look at Islam as that. But at the same time, if this was the case, what about during the time in the golden age of Islam, during the Ottomans and the Persians, that Islam was a center of academic things, and scientists of the Ottoman scientists, the Persian scientists. Egypt has some of the biggest libraries. And, that they have translated the knowledge from other countries. And in fact, when the, Pope and others, they destroyed like the libraries that existed in Rome and in Greece and everywhere else, thank goodness there was translation of some of those documents in Persian and Arabic and other local languages, Turkish, in the region, that they got translated back from these, Middle Eastern languages back to English. So these are some of the things that you need to consider. And of course, the tribal Arab culture. Now, in most of the Arab countries right here, the main socio-political structure is tribes. Now, many of these countries, they've tried to convert the tribes to act like a nation, settle them. Some of the other countries, like Iran, that they have had tribes, like in Iran, in the province of what they call Persia or Fars, there were tribes like Qashqais, okay? Or in the western part of it, near the Kurdish area, there are tribes that they, they deal with, what do you call it? Oh my gosh, like Bakhtiaris, okay? That's another one. Okay, so these are the tribes that they were traditionally moving. They were moving their goats and sheep and everything else. During the winter time, they would come to the flats, is that right? To the plains. So their sheep had grass and water and everything. And in summertime, when it's very, very hot, and the flats, they become pretty much like a desert, they would go to what? To the mountains. They try to settle these tribes and their movement because, you want a sense of order, okay? And sometimes these tribes having that type of lifestyle, it was very dangerous for the government, because if they didn't agree with the government, they already know how to use gun, they know how to run, and ride a horse and things like that. And many times they would cause sometimes trouble. Sometimes the governments would get smart and hire them to actually defend the country. That has actually happened as well. All right, just wanted to go over some of these factors. So we are done with this part. Let's go to the what? Next slide, if the system cooperates with us. Modernization. So modernization, as you see the reader is suggesting to you, is a very important factor. Okay? Here when we talk about modernization, we mostly focus on economic development. That's a much more neutral term. But please do not use, as we mentioned before, please do not use the term westernization, because that's derogatory, is that right? And not politically correct. Even the term modernization sometimes it has problem because it creates that dichotomy between modern and traditional. Can we say everything which is modern is absolutely wonderful and everything which is traditional is absolutely horrible? Like traditionally, we love our parents. Well, what's wrong with that? You see? You know, so, or for example, we respect our grandparents. These are traditional values, okay? So we do not have to throw everything out that is traditional. In other words, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Is that right? So modernization. So here we are talking about transformational one. Here this was a superimposed Western models on the structure which was. So the West has a parliament. Let's have a parliament. Is that right? Okay. That's one way of doing it. The other one is the adaptive modernization. Local institution can adapt and grow. If you really look at it, even in the tribal Arab society, they've had a sense of elections. It's not like the Western election. The election was this, that people who want to, let's say, for example, a leader of a tribe is retiring or is dead or something has happened to him. Is that right? Okay. The people who are a candidate, they would stand up, and then the individuals in the tribe that are allowed to vote or something, is that right? Because obviously the women, they would not vote, so it would be men. Every man was representing his family or his clan or something. They would pass by this, leader. They would either shake his hand, which Arabic word for that is bay'ah, or not. If they would shake his hand, that means that I'm giving you my vote. Is that right? Or if there were more than one candidate, maybe they wouldn't shake hand of the first one, but they like to shake hand of the second candidate, or the third candidate, however the system was. So if you really think about it, this is also an election system. It's not the Western model, but maybe this system can develop. All right? So we don't have to say, oh, we do it exactly like what the West does, because sometimes when you superimpose something on somebody else and the people are not ready for it, they react to it. That's what you need to consider. All right. Enough about this one. Let's go to the next slide if we would cooperate. It's cooperating. Here we go. The military. Is that right? Well, military has had some successes. Is that right? The success has been, it has usually been the largest employer. Is that right? It's like Disney in Central Florida, the largest employer. Is that right? So then modernization effort, in establishing military-industrial complex. Because the military needed to have its own equipment, is that right? They tried to have that one without, constantly importing things. So let's say uniform. All right, you have a textile company. This doesn't take much of an, attitude. Any tailor can do it. You have the textile, you have your tailors, you cut and you sew. Is that right? So here we go. That contributes to taking care of the uniform. How about the bullets? Okay, we can make the shelling, then put the material that you need to put inside it, close it up. Here we go. You have your bullets. Is that right? You have your ammunition, and some easier form of the weapon system you can do. Nowadays, some of these countries, they make amazing product. Look right now in the news. They're constantly talking about during the Russia, Ukraine, Iran is selling to Russia, it's what? It's droids and, it's, missiles and it's this and it's that. How the heck did they come up with this? Again, a part of what they started developing as the military-industrial complex. By the way, we borrowed this concept from one of our own President Eisenhower, who was from the military. And he said that even in the U.S., we have to be careful for military-industrial complex. All right. Then, preventing political chaos. So when military somewhere tries to make sure that what sometimes is used to bring a sense of order. Last but not least, less direct intervention. Sometimes military has learned, instead of just putting the soldiers right away into the street or something, the military leaders, they would sometimes give a warning. Like, hey, if we see too many, groups fighting one another, killing one another, because sometimes there are different political groups fighting one another. Is that right? Instead of doing it in a civilized fashion in an election, is that right? That sometimes they attack each other. Okay, so then sometimes they give a signal, and then people will say, okay, well, we don't want the military coming in and kind of coup d'etat or something, so we better behave ourselves, all right, or police ourselves. Now, what are some of the failures of the military? Here we go. Failure to manage the economy. Usually military says, oh, we are very professional, we can manage the economy. Sometimes they can't. Is that right? Even with the best of intention. Failure to build a nation. Sometimes they say, oh yeah, we are promoting this language, we are promoting this, we are promoting these values. It's easy to say than to do it. Is that right? Next one, failure to promote democracy. Military structure by its very nature is authoritarian. Very clear what, source of authority and hierarchy and everything. How could an organization like that promote democracy? Is that right? Next one. Indirect intervention and usually subtle. Just like what I told you. Sometimes what happens is the military doesn't come directly there, but the generals, they keep giving signals. Oh, maybe we have to do this, And so the civilians, they say, oh, maybe we should watch out. We shouldn't do this or we shouldn't do that. Well, obviously it's restricting their political rights. Is that right? But they have not much of an option. But those, signals are usually very subtle. Next one is the influence over the policy. Sometimes the civilians, they want to do some stuff that in terms of development, in terms of defense, in terms of that, military has a different perspective, and sometimes they impose their views. So, means of regime control, and that's what happens. Is that right? With military. Sometimes, as I mentioned, sometimes they use tribes or sect or mercenaries to bring, protection to the country. Patrimonial strategies like divide and conquer. Saddam Hussein used to do that. Saddam Hussein, as soon as his generals, they became too popular, he would create like a divide and conquer. Oh, General so-and-so as opposed to General this and that. You see what I mean? It would create a problem between them. So they have a rivalry between the two of them. So who would sit happy and smiley? Saddam Hussein. Because then he knew they're fighting each other so much, they're not going to fight him. All right? Next, political institutions. Sometimes some of the, groups that they develop, is that right? Some of it is with the encouragement of the more educated class coming from military, but some of it is also just the opposite. So we cannot say there is only one solution to this one. So there are some political institutions that are encouraged, to the military, and there are some that are not, depending on the ideology of the time. So military-industrial complex, as we mentioned, is a major source of power. Now, let's go to the next institution. And here we're talking about bureaucracy. I thought your chapter did a great job in this one, okay? I know that sometimes talking about bureaucracy, oh my God, is so damn boring. But here we go. They did such a great job of talking about the 4 stage of bureaucracy. So I just mentioned it, I highlighted it because I know a lot of students, they say, Dr. Sadi, why don't you give us a study guide? What have I always said? I always say that your PowerPoints are your study guides, okay? I read all of that material, the text that we are supposed to read, the articles we are supposed to read, plus some of the points that I want to organize, and lecture you. I put them all together in these very, very clear PowerPoints. So please follow it. All right, so here we go. Just going over that one because your text has done such a great job. 1, the supremacy of the traditional political forces. That's the first stage, okay, of any step. Then, next, with the military taking charge of the development under a strong leader. Usually, a strong leader, by using the military, tries to bring modernization, tries to strengthen the country. Erosion of professionalism. Because when the military is putting all these pressures here and there, guess what? People, they don't develop a sense of independence. Let me make sure that I know in a situation like that, what's the best course of action, you see? So it kind of erodes their professionalism. Plus some people, they start getting used to what? Getting used to bribes, Oh, I'm not making enough money, so to get my job done, you want your passport faster? Okay. What type of money can you give me? Or, sometimes there is a term for it, bakhshish, is that right? Basically bribe, okay? That you have to give. So, and that's erosion of, obviously, traditional professionalism. Is that right? Then depoliticization and the subordination to the elected officials. And that's when bureaucracy is fully developed. Okay. So, next one. Legislative. That's a very important one. Obviously, we start with the what? why the ruling elite even establishes legislative. Well, there are reasons for that. Look, this could make a very nice question. Is that right? I can ask you, what are the 3 out of the 4 major reasons for a ruling class establishes legislative? That makes a very good short answer. Okay? So here we go. 1, legitimizing the regime. So we do have a parliament. Now maybe parliament is not worth anything. Is that right? Because they're rubber stabbing everything. The king wants this? Yes. The president wants this? Yes. You see? But still, we do have parliament. Is that right? Next, communication among elite and between elite and masses. When you have a parliament, of course you have elite there. So elite people that are communicating with one another, those represented over there, oh yeah, this has happened, that happened, what do you think, what do you think? You see what I mean? That's one. Now, there are going to be some elements of masses over there too. So that's also an opportunity for elite to get an idea for, ooh, that's what the masses want. Oh, maybe this is some of the demands. Maybe we can meet it before it gets worse. Is that right? Next, cooperation and appeasement of the social forces. There is a major problem. Social forces, they have a sense of, oh, I want social justice. I want, justice. So sometimes they just say justice. They don't say even social justice. Is that right? Or they want, social change or whatever. Well, as soon as they identify it, maybe they can diffuse it by taking care of it somehow. Containment and supervision of the opposition. Well, opposition are going to be there. Then they know, oh, here is the opposition. This is what they say. That way, they will use it to what? They use those like parliaments, or the Arabic word for it and Persian word both is what? The term majlis. Is that right? To identify and control it. Next, control over legislative. How do they control it? One element is election. Many times these elections are forged, is that right? And in fact, in one of those elections, in Iran, people were running around and they were saying, what happened to my vote? Because they voted for somebody else, and Ahmadinejad won a second term, who was not very popular president. Another one is manipulation. They manipulate the result or intimidate people who want to vote, or censorship of the radio and TV and newspapers and magazines and everything else. What about the internal control? One is the constitutional legal restriction. Legal, for example, functions like, oh, you cannot do this, or you have to be this many years before you can actually run, or that age, or you have to be this, or you have to be that, or certain professions are prevented, like sometimes military people are prevented, unless they're retired or something. Internal administrative, many times the legislative, they really do not have staff, I mean, I was just thinking about, the main legislative that I know they have a lot of staff members is the U.S. Congress. Because if you think about it, even our representative in state of Florida, they hardly have any staff. How the heck do they get all the work done? They have to use either freebies or volunteers or rely on their families or friends or somebody else, or they're constantly working like a dog. Is that right? Because you don't have staff, you can't catch up with all the events which is happening. Last but not least, guarantee of the freedom to what? Guarantees the freedom to, so one of the internal control is a guarantee of the freedom to speak. So at least it provides you with some opportunity to express yourself. Okay, last, how do we conclude? We can say a couple of things. Number one, observation would be that authoritarian systems are not totalitarian system. An authoritarian system is a system that sometimes we have obviously known it as dictatorship. There is no substitute for water, I tell you. Okay, so an authoritarian dictatorship basically is trying to control your behavior. It's not trying to change your mind. It just says, hey, don't rebel against me, don't do this, don't do that, don't damage or whatever else. A totalitarian system, is that right? So an authoritarian system would be something like Assad's regime. Is that right? It's a dictatorial. All right. A totalitarian system, however, is a regime that says to succeed, this is how you need to think. Like we can say Islamic Republic after revolution, is that right? Has become like that because it's a doctrine. They put, for example, studies for even, people who are studying banking, like, 20, 30 credit hours of what? Religion. Well, at UCF, with 30 credit hours, you get a major. Is that right? And then I know that I know people that I interviewed and everything. They were bankers, and they said they were smack in the middle of their studies, and suddenly they started receiving, oh yeah, you need to take this many courses and this many credit hours of religion or something. How would that one come out handy for a banker? Is that right? But from their perspective, that was important. So that's a totalitarian regime. They're trying to get you to think about them. In other words, they're trying to control your bad brain. Now, this is not particular to the Middle East. A lot of regimes around the world have been like that. The Soviet system, totalitarian. The Chinese, under Mao, totalitarian. Even right now, they're totalitarian. Is that right? So they're all examples like around that. Cuba's Castro. Is that right? And the Castro's regime, basically, whichever you want to refer to it. They all have like a little book, little red book, little green book, little this book, little Ayatollah Khomeini's book. Is that right? They all try to create a new mankind. Supposedly it's better than before. Is that right? The bottom line is they're trying to control your mind. Okay, next one. Traditional, personalism versus total submission to the state. So here we see that there are some traditional systems like, personalism, which is the connection with the families and this and that, as opposed to, no, the family connection goes away. You completely have to submit yourself to the regime. What else? The gap between society and state. This is where sometimes we call public and private. Is that right? This is also something that we call, there is not much of a development of what? There's not much of a development of interest groups, local, as our founding fathers used to say, factions. They used to say interest group. So there's not much of that. And the future of political institution, very frankly, in the Middle East is still unclear. Why? Because growing demands for participation continues. People, as they're getting more educated, they keep asking that tough question. Why? Why do I have to follow you? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? That's a very, very tough question. Next one. Increasing level of education. Education is increasing as you're educating people. It's educated people who are questioning things. Uneducated people, they cannot read and write. You just tell them, in the holy book, it says this, and I have to rule you. They say, yes, sir. Is that right? Educated people, they say, why should I listen to you? Is that right? You made such and such decision, and I've done my Google research, and it seemed like you have done the wrong thing. You see? They question you. Last but not least, expanding sources of information. We're going to talk about this even more and more. Look, there was a time that every regime had a complete control over the source of information. So all the information was very much supportive of the regime. Nowadays, in any country with any kind of internet, they like it or not, satellite, this, that, people, they get their information from anywhere. They don't depend only on the regime to provide them with information. In fact, many people, they do not even trust the regime. When I interview, for example, people through WhatsApp, because it's encrypted, is that right? So they can talk to me very comfortably or something. They say they do not even listen to any kind of news program coming from Iranian radio, Iranian TV, because it's all full of what? Propaganda. They just listen to BBC and Voice of America and this and that. Because even though they're coming from outside, guess what? They actually have their own biases too. But they prefer the information from that. They compare them with one another as opposed to listen to what comes from the government. Is that right? That shows this is a revolution, technological revolution. All right. As you can see, we covered a very important topic. Is that right? Institution, political institution, which is very important for political scientists. So we have covered leadership, now we covered institution, and then next, after this module 7 would be module 8, and module 8 would be our second exam. I give you a little mini lecture about that one next time. Have a wonderful time, and if you have any question, you always email me. Thank you, and bye.